The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning when Boone Carter had exactly $17 to his name. The bank foreclosure notice lay open on the kitchen table, its official letterhead and cold legal terms spelling the end of everything he had fought to preserve. $17 in a dream that had withered under the harsh reality of debt, drought, and despair. At 45, Boone's weathered face carried the lines of a man who had weathered too many storms, literal and figurative. His calloused hands, hands that had planted, harvested, built, and buried, now trembled slightly as he refolded the final notice from Midland County Bank. 5 generations of Carter farming history were about to end with his signature on the surrender documents. From the small kitchen, Clara, his 16-year-old daughter, worked quietly preparing a simple breakfast. The refrigerator light cast harsh shadows across her face as she examined their dwindling supplies, highlighting cheekbones that had become too prominent in recent months. Despite the circumstances, she maintained a quiet determination, a resilience inherited from her mother. "We still have eggs, Papa?" she called over her shoulder, her voice deliberately cheerful. "And that jam Mrs. Peterson brought over should last us through the week." Boone nodded, not trusting himself to speak. Clara had her mother's eyes, warm, perceptive, kind even in the face of hardship. She'd grown up too quickly after Sarah's death, shouldering responsibilities no 16-year-old should have to bear. The thought of Sarah sent a familiar ache through his chest. 2 years gone now, taken by an aggressive cancer that had overwhelmed her body before they'd even had time to process the diagnosis. The medical bills had been the beginning of the end. Specialists in the city, experimental treatments that insurance wouldn't cover, medications that cost more than their monthly mortgage. By the time they buried Sarah, the farm was mortgaged to the hilt. Then came the drought. The worst in 50 years, the meteorologist said. Crops withered in the fields. Wells ran dry. Livestock prices plummeted as farmers across 3 states were forced to sell, and the bills kept coming. "You should eat something," Clara said, setting a plate of the scrambled eggs before him. "We've got that meeting with the bank today." The meeting, 3 o'clock. Their last chance to beg for an extension they both knew wouldn't come. The regional drought had claimed too many farms already. The banks had run out of patience and mercy months ago. The sound of tires on gravel pulled Boone from his thoughts. Through the window, he watched the mail truck stop at their box, the carrier placing something inside before continuing down the rural route. "I'll get it," Clara offered, already heading for the door, the old border collie Rusty following at her heels. When she returned, she carried a thick envelope with unfamiliar handwriting. "It's addressed to you, Papa, from someone named Malachi Brooks?" The name meant nothing to Boone. The return address was from a small town in Montana he'd never heard of. The envelope was yellowed at the edges, as if it had been prepared long ago and only recently sent. "Who's Malachi Brooks?" Clara asked, setting the envelope on the table next to his untouched coffee. "No idea," Boone replied, turning the envelope over in his hands. It was heavy, containing more than just a letter. His thumb slid under the seal, cracking it open as Clara watched, curiosity brightening her eyes. Inside was a single page of lined paper covered in shaky handwriting, a folded legal document, and something else that slipped out onto the table. "You inherit my ranch and everything on it," the letter began without preamble. "Look for what I couldn't take with me. The answer is where the old oak stands alone." Boone read the words again, confusion furrowing his brow. The legal document was a deed for 200 acres of land in Montana, transferred to his name. The lawyer's note attached explained that Malachi Brooks, recently deceased, had no close family and had specified Boone Carter as his sole heir. "Papa, what does it mean? Who is this person?" Clara asked, peering over his shoulder at the cryptic message. "I don't know," Boone answered honestly, examining the deed. "According to this, he's left me 200 acres of what they're calling unproductive land in western Montana." "Look at this," Clara whispered, holding up what had fallen from the envelope. A photograph, edges worn and color faded with age. The man in the photo could have been Boone's twin. The same deep-set eyes, the same strong jawline, the same slight tilt of the head when facing the camera. But the date stamped in the corner read 1968, years before Boone was born. "Who is he?" Clara asked, her voice hushed with wonder. "He looks exactly like you." Boone took the photograph, studying the familiar stranger's face. Beside the man stood a young woman, her features partially obscured by the angle. But something about her profile tugged at Boone's memory. He turned the photo over. Written in faded ink on the back were the words, Malachi and Eleanor, 1968. Eleanor? Clara's eyes widened. Wasn't that Grandma's name? The room seemed to tilt beneath Boone's feet. Eleanor Carter, his mother, who had died when he was 12 years old, who had never once mentioned having a brother named Malachi. Papa, are you okay? Boone stared at the photograph, memories stirring like dust in sunlight. His mother telling him bedtime stories about hidden treasures and family secrets. Stories he'd dismissed as fairy tales meant to comfort a child whose father had abandoned them. Stories about gold coins and maps and promises kept through generations. This man is, Boone's voice cracked. If this is real, he was my uncle, my mother's brother. Your uncle, but you never mentioned having an uncle. Because I didn't know I had one. Mom never talked about her family except to say they were all gone. Clara studied the photograph again. Well, he clearly wasn't gone. And now he's left you his ranch. Her eyes lit up with a sudden hope. Papa, do you know what this means? We have somewhere to go, something that can't be taken away from us. Boone unfolded the deed, reading the description of the property. 200 acres of unimproved land in western Montana. No assessment of value, just a legal description of boundaries and mineral rights. It might be nothing, Clara, just worthless land in the middle of nowhere. Or it might be everything, she countered, that stubborn optimism shining through. The letter said to look for what he couldn't take with him. That sounds like he left something valuable. Boone rubbed his face, feeling the stubble of 3 days without shaving. He was too tired for mysteries, too beaten down to feel hope. But Clara was right. They had nowhere else to go, nothing left to lose. We have to go there, he said finally, looking up at his daughter. To Montana. Clara's smile bloomed, genuine this time. Really? You mean it? This Malachi Brooks, if the photo is real, he was my uncle. Your great uncle. Boone held up the deed, and he left us land. Maybe it's nothing, but maybe it's something, Clara finished, already mentally packing. When do we leave? After the bank meeting. We'll face them, tell them they can have the farm, and then we'll head north. 2 days later, with the bank notices stuffed in a drawer and their few belongings packed in the truck, Boone and Clara headed north. Rusty lay across the back seat, his head hanging out the window, tongue flapping in the wind. The odometer ticked steadily higher as they drove, each mile taking them further from the only home Clara had ever known. The bank meeting had been mercifully brief. The manager had seemed almost relieved when Boone announced they were surrendering the property voluntarily. No messy eviction necessary, just sign here and here and here. 5 generations of Carter farming history ended with the stroke of a pen. Gas stops were calculated with military precision. No unnecessary purchases, no detours. Every dollar had to stretch until they reached Montana, with enough left to get back if this inheritance turned out to be worthless. As the miles passed, Clara peppered Boone with questions about the grandmother she'd never met. What was she like, Grandma Eleanor? Boone's hands tightened on the steering wheel. Beautiful, smart, but sick, Mom, I said. Always sad underneath, she sounded to tell me stories at night about our family having some great secret fortune. I thought they were just stories. Did she ever mention her brother? Never, not once. Boone frowned at the highway stretching before them. After she died, I bounced between foster homes, never stayed in one place long enough to put down roots. Is that why you fought so hard to keep our farm? To have roots? The question hit Boone like a physical blow. Yeah, I guess so. Wanted you to have what I didn't. A home. A place that was ours. Clara reached across the seat and squeezed his arm. We're still together. That's home enough. As night fell on their first day of travel, they pulled into a roadside motel, the kind with a flickering neon sign and rooms that smelled of cheap disinfectant. Clara fell asleep almost immediately, exhausted from the emotional upheaval of leaving home. But Boone lay awake, staring at the water stains on the ceiling, the photograph of Malachi and his mother clutched in his hand. Why had his mother never mentioned a brother? What had happened between them that was so terrible she'd erased him from her life, from her stories? And why, After all these years, had Malachi Brooks reached out from beyond the grave to find his sister's son? The second day brought them into more mountainous terrain. Flat farmlands gave way to rolling hills, the landscape growing more dramatic with each passing hour. Clara took photos with her phone, documenting the changing scenery with genuine wonder. "Mom would have loved this," she said quietly, watching an eagle soar above a distant ridge. "She would," Boone agreed, his throat tightening. Sarah had always wanted to travel, to see the mountains and oceans beyond their county lines. Cancer had stolen that dream, along with so many others. "Tell me more about Grandma Eleanor," Clara asked as they crossed the state line into Montana. "Did she look like me?" Boone glanced at his daughter. There was something of his mother in Clara's high cheekbones and the determined set of her jaw. "A little. She had darker hair, but the same eyes, same way of seeing the good in everything." "What kinds of stories did she tell you? About the family fortune?" Boone hesitated, memories surfacing that he hadn't revisited in decades. "She talked about our ancestors having a collection of valuable coins, said our great-great-grandfather started it, and each generation added to it. According to her stories, the collection was hidden somewhere safe until the family needed it. Do you think it was real?" "I thought it was just a fairy tale, something to make a kid feel special when there wasn't much else to be proud of." Boone shook his head. "But now, with this inheritance from an uncle I never knew existed—" "Maybe her stories were true," Clara finished, excitement creeping into her voice. "Maybe," Boone conceded, though he wouldn't let himself hope too much. Life had taught him the danger of expectations. They drove on, deeper into Montana's rugged landscape. The third day brought them to the final stretch of their journey. According to the map, Malachi's ranch was nestled in a remote valley surrounded by mountains, accessible only by a single dirt road. "We're almost there," Boone said, checking the directions the lawyer had provided. "Should be just over that ridge." They crested the hill and Clara gasped. Below them stretched a valley, pine trees clustered along a winding creek. And there, nestled against the base of a mountain, sat what must have been Malachi Brooks's ranch. From a distance, it had a certain rustic charm. Up close, the reality was far more sobering. The ranch house was a dilapidated structure with rotted boards hanging loose from the walls. Windows gaped like empty eye sockets, a few intact panes reflecting the afternoon sun. The barn leaned precariously, as if one strong wind would finally end its long struggle against gravity. "It's," Clara began, searching for something positive to say. "A wreck," Boone finished, parking the truck and surveying what was now their property. 200 acres of what the county records called unproductive land in the middle of nowhere. As they stepped out of the truck, Boone noticed something that made the hair on his neck stand up. Fresh tire tracks in the dirt. Not their own. Someone had been here recently. "Stay close," he told Clara, eyeing the surrounding trees with new wariness. Rusty jumped from the truck and immediately began exploring, nose to the ground, tail wagging excitedly. Clara followed more cautiously, making her way toward the house while Boone examined the tire tracks. They circled the property and disappeared back down the access road. Someone had driven around the entire perimeter, as if surveying it. Near the porch steps, Boone noticed a window that had been broken recently. The glass still sharp, not yet dulled by weather. Inside, footprints in the dust showed someone had entered and moved through several rooms. The search hadn't been subtle. Furniture had been shifted, floorboards pried up in places. "Papa, come look at this," Clara called from near the porch steps. She was kneeling beside what looked like a rusted metal box half buried in the dirt. The lid was secured with a padlock that had nearly corroded through. Boone gave it a sharp blow with a rock, and the lock crumbled away. Inside were 3 items, a hand-drawn map of the property with strange symbols marked at various points, a heavy brass key unlike any Boone had ever seen, and a photograph of what appeared to be the same oak tree mentioned in Malachi's letter. "What do you think these symbols mean?" Clara asked, tracing them with her fingertip. 5 different locations were marked on the property, each with a unique symbol. "No idea," Boone admitted, turning the heavy key over in his hands. It was old, possibly antique, with intricate engravings along the shaft. "But this key has to fit something important." Before Boone could examine the items further, Rusty began barking frantically at something near the tree line. The dog's hackles were raised, his bark taking on the deeper tone he reserved for strangers or predators. "Rusty! Here, boy!" Boone called, motioning for Clara to stay behind him as he moved toward the sound. They followed the dog's lead to the edge of the property where a massive oak tree stood alone in a small clearing. Unlike the surrounding pines, this tree had been here long before the ranch was built. Its massive trunk, wider than Boone could have wrapped his arms around. Carved deep into its bark were the same strange symbols from the map, weathered but clear. Below them, barely visible unless you knew where to look, were initials, MB plus EC. "Malachi Brooks and Eleanor Carter," Clara whispered, tracing the letters with her finger. Beneath the initials was a phrase, "The knife cuts newer than the symbols above. What's buried stays buried until the time is right." "Papa, what does it mean?" Clara asked, stepping back to take in the entire tree. Boone shook his head, running his hand over the rough bark. "I don't know, sweetheart, but I think your great-uncle left us more than just a rundown ranch." Using the map they'd found, Boone determined that the oak tree marked the center of a series of points, forming a rough circle around the property. Each point was marked with one of the strange symbols. "We should start digging here," he said, pointing to the ground beneath the oak. "This seems to be the main marker." Clara nodded, retrieving the shovel from their truck. The ground was hard, compacted by years of Montana winters and summers. Each shovelful required effort that left Boone's muscles aching. Clara took turns with him, her determination making up for what she lacked in strength. The first shovel of dirt told Boone everything he needed to know about his inheritance. Rock-hard ground, baked by years of drought, with soil so poor it couldn't grow weeds. He wiped sweat from his forehead and looked at the map again, the symbols seeming to mock him from the yellowed paper. "Maybe we're doing this wrong," Clara suggested after 30 minutes of fruitless digging. "Maybe the symbols aren't about buried treasure, but something else." But Boone was stubborn, a trait his mother had often lamented. He kept digging, and his persistence was finally rewarded when his shovel struck something solid. Metal. "I hit something," he called to Clara, who had wandered a few feet away to examine other markings on the tree. They worked faster now, clearing dirt from around the edges of whatever lay buried. What they uncovered wasn't a treasure chest or a buried safe, but a metal door embedded in the ground. It was about 3 feet square, with a complicated-looking lock mechanism at its center. "The key," Clara said, excitement making her voice tremble. "Try the key." Boone inserted the brass key into the lock. It fit perfectly, but when he tried to turn it, the mechanism resisted. Years of soil and moisture had likely corroded the internal workings. "It's stuck," he grunted, applying more pressure. Suddenly, Rusty's barking cut through the quiet afternoon. The dog stood at attention, facing the access road, his entire body rigid with alertness. In the distance, the sound of approaching vehicles grew louder. "Get behind me," Boone told Clara, pulling the key from the lock and pocketing it. "And no matter what happens, don't mention what we found." 3 black SUVs appeared on the horizon, dust billowing behind them as they made their way up the rough road to the ranch. They came to a stop in a semicircle around Boone's truck, effectively blocking any quick escape. From the lead vehicle emerged a man in his early 50s, wearing an expensive suit that looked absurdly out of place against the backdrop of the dilapidated ranch. His silver hair was perfectly styled, his shoes polished to a mirror shine despite the dusty surroundings. He approached with the confident stride of someone accustomed to getting his way. "Mr. Carter, I presume?" The man extended a manicured hand. "Richard Thornton, Consolidated Land Development. I understand you recently inherited this property." Boone didn't take the offered hand. "How'd you know about that? We just got here 3 hours ago." Thornton's smile never wavered, but something cold flickered in his eyes. "We've been monitoring this property since Malachi's death 2 months ago. Motion sensors, cameras. We expected someone would eventually show up to claim the inheritance." He glanced around the broken-down ranch with obvious distaste. "I'm here to save you from a considerable burden. This land is worthless for conventional purposes. No water rights, poor soil, too remote for farming or tourism." From the other vehicles, 4 men had emerged and now stood at casual attention, their stances suggesting military or security training. They weren't openly armed, but Boone had no doubt they were carrying weapons. Clara stepped closer to her father, one hand unconsciously moving to her pocket where she'd stashed the map. Thornton's eyes followed the movement with unmistakable interest. But my company specializes in, shall we say, making the best of difficult situations. I'm prepared to offer you $50,000 cash for the entire property. 50,000, more money than Boone had ever seen at one time. Enough to pay off some of their debts, maybe even make a down payment on a small place somewhere else. Start over. But something in Thornton's eager expression made him hesitate. The man was too prepared, too knowledgeable about their arrival, and his eyes kept darting to the partially excavated area beneath the oak tree. That's generous, Boone said carefully. Maybe too generous for worthless land. Thornton's smile flickered for just a moment. I'm a businessman, Mr. Carter. I see potential where others see problems. The offer stands for 24 hours only. I suggest you consider it carefully. He handed Boone a business card with a phone number handwritten on the back. Call me when you're ready to be sensible. As the SUVs drove away, kicking up clouds of dust, Clara grabbed her father's arm. Papa, he knew about what we found. Did you see how he looked at the excavation? Boone had noticed. He'd also noticed how quickly Thornton had found them, how he'd known exactly when to arrive. Someone had been watching, waiting for them to show up at the ranch. Let's get inside before it gets dark, he said, eyeing the surrounding hills with new suspicion. We need to figure out what's really going on here. As Thornton's vehicles disappeared down the road, Boone felt a chill that had nothing to do with the mountain air. He'll be back, he said quietly, and next time, he won't be so polite. What should we do? Clara asked, her earlier excitement now tempered with caution. We need to understand what we're dealing with. Boone picked up the map they'd found, and we need to do it fast. The interior of the ranch house was in better condition than the exterior suggested. The main room was sparse but clean, with a stone fireplace and simple furniture covered in dust cloths. It looked as if Malachi had prepared the place for a long absence, not knowing he would never return. Clara moved through the rooms, removing dust covers and opening windows to let in the fresh mountain air. It's not so bad in here, she called from what appeared to be a study. There's electricity and the water runs. Cold, but it runs. Boone was examining a collection of framed photographs on the mantel. Most were landscapes, the mountains in different seasons, the creek running through the property. But one caught his eye, a much younger Malachi standing beside a teenage girl who had to be a Eleanor. They were smiling, arms around each other's shoulders, standing in front of this very house when it was new and well-maintained. They were close once, he murmured, wiping dust from the frame. Wonder what happened to change that. As night fell, Boone and Clara continued their exploration by lantern light. In what must have been Malachi's bedroom, Clara found a loose floorboard near the window. Papa, look at this, she called, excitement in her voice. The floor sounds different here. Boone helped her pry up the board, revealing a small space beneath. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, was a leather-bound journal. It's a diary, she said, carefully opening the brittle pages. Look, it's your uncle's handwriting. Boone looked over her shoulder as she read the first entry aloud. Eleanor came by today. She's worried about the boy. Says he's got the same stubborn streak as our father. I told her the secret dies with us, but she thinks different. She thinks someday Boone might need what's buried here more than we do. Clara looked up at her father, eyes wide. He knew you. He wrote about you by name. Boone took the journal, flipping through more pages. Entry after entry mentioned Eleanor, mentioned Boone by name, mentioned something called the collection. But one entry from 15 years ago caught his attention. Sold another piece to the collector in Denver today. The 1933 Double Eagle brought in $2 million alone. Eleanor thinks I'm crazy for not spending it, but this isn't about money. It's about preserving history. The collection is worth over $100 million now, but it's worthless if the wrong people get it. Papa, Clara whispered, her face pale in the lantern light. $100 million? Another entry, dated just 3 months ago, made Boone's blood run cold. Eleanor's boy is struggling now, lost his wife, fighting to keep his land. The time might be coming sooner than we planned. If something happens to me, he'll need the map and the key. He'll need to understand what our family has been guarding. How had this stranger known about Sarah's death? Known about their financial troubles? How had Malachi been watching them from hundreds of miles away without ever making contact? He had someone keeping tabs on us, Boone realized aloud, someone reporting back to him. As they read further, they discovered that Malachi had been a collector of rare coins for over 40 years. What had started as a hobby had turned into an obsession, then into a mission. He traveled the country attending estate sales, auctions, and private showings, always looking for specific pieces to add to his collection. Found three more 1916D Mercury dimes at the estate sale in Colorado Springs. One entry read, "People don't know what they have. 40 years of collecting, buying from ignorant sellers, trading with other collectors who needed cash fast. What started as grandfather's small coin collection is now worth a fortune that could change Boone's life forever." The last entry in the journal was dated 1 week before Malachi's death. "I can't take it with me, but I can make sure it goes to the right person. Everything depends on him figuring out the clues. The collection is worth more than he could imagine, but only if he's smart enough to find it." Clara grabbed his arm. "Papa, what collection? What was Uncle Malachi hiding?" Boone closed the journal and his mind racing. "Coins, rare coins. That's what he was collecting. And if that entry is right, they're worth a fortune. Is that why Mr. Thornton wants the land so badly? He knows about the coins." "Must be, but there's something else going on here. Malachi wasn't just collecting coins. He was hiding them, protecting them from someone, and he set up some kind of system to make sure only the right person could find them." Clara's eyes gleamed with excitement in the lantern light. "Us. He wanted us to find them. That's why he left you the ranch. But why all the secrecy? Why not just leave the collection to me directly?" Clara thought for a moment. "Maybe because of people like Thornton. If everyone knew about a $100 million coin collection, they'd be swarming this place. This way, only someone who knows the clues can find it." As they continued reading through the journal, the pieces began to fall into place. Malachi Brooks had spent 40 years building one of the most valuable private coin collections in the country. But instead of keeping it in a bank vault or selling it to museums, he had hidden it here, on this seemingly worthless piece of land. "Listen to this," Clara said, reading from a page near the end. "The primary vault contains the core collection. The secondary locations hold the special pieces. Only the complete map will reveal all 12 sites." 12 sites? Boone looked at the hand-drawn map they'd found. It showed only 5 marked locations, including the oak tree. "There must be more maps," Clara reasoned, "or maybe the symbols have coordinates for the other sites." They pored over the journal entries late into the night, trying to make sense of Malachi's cryptic notes and the strange symbols on the map. Clara, whose mind had always been quick with puzzles, began to see patterns that Boone missed. "Papa, look at this," she said, pointing to a series of numbers in the margin of one page. "These could be coordinates or dates. See how they're grouped in pairs?" Boone nodded, impressed by his daughter's perception. "Could be, but we need to figure out what they mean before Thornton comes back." "Do you think he'll really come back?" "A man doesn't bring an armed security team to make a simple real estate offer. He knows something about this property, something valuable enough to stake out the place for months." Clara's expression grew serious. "What are we going to do?" Boone looked at the journal, the map, and the heavy brass key that had fit the lock in the ground. "We're going to solve this puzzle before he does. And we're going to find out what was so important that your great-uncle spent 40 years collecting it and your grandmother never spoke of it." As Clara finally dozed off on a dusty sofa, wrapped in a blanket they'd brought from home, Boone sat by the window watching the stars wheel overhead. The same stars his mother would have seen from this very spot. The same stars that had guided his unknown uncle through 40 years of secrecy and planning. Somewhere on these 200 acres lay a fortune that could change their lives forever. But as Boone studied the journal entries about hidden vaults and coded messages, he couldn't shake the feeling that they had stumbled into something far more complex than a simple inheritance. Malachi Brooks hadn't just been collecting coins. He had been protecting them. From whom? And why leave them to a nephew he'd never met? As dawn broke over the mountains, casting long shadows across the valley, Boone made a decision. Thornton's offer of $50,000 was tempting, especially to a man who had just lost everything. But there was something valuable hidden on this property, something worth much more than $50,000, something his uncle had spent 40 years collecting and protecting, something meant for him and Clara. He wouldn't sell, not until he knew the truth. Not until he understood why his mother had never spoken of her brother, why Malachi had watched over them from afar for decades, and what secret was worth burying in 12 different locations across 200 acres of Montana wilderness. Clara stirred as the first rays of sunlight streamed through the dusty windows. She sat up, rubbing sleep from her eyes, and looked at her father still seated by the window. "Did you sleep at all, Papa?" Boone shook his head. "Too much to think about." Clara joined him at the window, gazing out at the property that now belonged to them. "What's our plan?" "We need to figure out what these symbols mean and where the rest of the sites are located," Boone said, indicating the map. "And we need to do it before Thornton comes back." Clara studied the map again, her brow furrowed in concentration. "Papa, people don't bury things they want to lose. They bury things they want to find again someday, or that they want someone else to find." Boone smiled at his daughter's insight. "You're right, sweetheart, and I think your great-uncle wanted us to find whatever he buried. The question is, can we figure it out before Thornton does?" The morning sun cast long shadows across the ranch as Boone and Clara sat at the kitchen table, poring over Malachi's journal. They'd barely slept, their minds racing with questions about the mysterious inheritance and the stranger who seemed so desperate to buy it. "Listen to this entry," Clara said, pointing to a passage dated nearly 40 years earlier. "Grandfather's collection arrived today from the bank vault. Just 10 coins, but what coins they are. The 1804 silver dollar alone would fetch a small fortune. Eleanor thinks I'm crazy for wanting to continue his work, but she doesn't understand. These aren't just coins, they're history you can hold in your hand." Boone leaned closer, fascinated by this glimpse into his unknown uncle's life. "So the collection started with our great-grandfather?" Clara nodded, turning the page. "According to this, he began collecting during the Great Depression, bought rare coins for pennies on the dollar when people were desperate for change." "Not exactly honorable," Boone muttered. "Maybe not, but listen to this," Clara continued. "Used the Roosevelt silver dime proceeds to save the Jenkins family farm when the bank tried to foreclose. Eleanor said I was foolish to sell something so valuable. But coins are meant to circulate. What matters is who they help along the way." Boone's perception of his uncle shifted slightly. "So he wasn't just hoarding wealth." "It seems more complicated than that," Clara agreed, flipping through more pages. They spent hours reading through decades of Malachi's life, piecing together the story of a man who had transformed a modest family collection into something extraordinary. Malachi had traveled the country attending estate sales, auctions, and coin shows, always looking for specific pieces to complete his collection. He'd developed relationships with dealers and other collectors, building a reputation as a knowledgeable but eccentric enthusiast who disappeared for months at a time. "What strikes me," Boone said, "is how methodical he was. This wasn't just a hobby, it was a mission." One entry from the early 1980s caught their attention. "Eleanor brought the boy today, just for an hour while she ran errands in town. He has her eyes, that same curious spark. Found him in my study, carefully examining the Lincoln penny collection as if each one contained a universe. Had to hide my smile when he arranged them by date without being told. The Carter blood runs true in this one." "He met you," Clara whispered. "You were here in this house." Boone stared at the entry, a vague memory stirring. A tall man with kind eyes, the smell of pipe tobacco and leather-bound books, a jar of pennies that caught the sunlight like copper flames. "I don't remember him," Boone said slowly, "but I remember this place or something about it. The way the light comes through those windows in the afternoon. The creak sounds at night." As they read further, the relationship between Malachi and Eleanor became clearer and more complicated. They had been close as children, bound by the loss of their parents and a shared interest in the family coin collection. But something had changed in their 20s. "Eleanor announced her engagement today," read an entry from 1969. "Carter is everything I feared, ambitious, restless, with that dangerous charm that promises the world but delivers only heartbreak. I tried to warn her, but she accused me of jealousy, of trying to keep her here on this godforsaken ranch. Said terrible things, said I was hiding from life while she was embracing it. Maybe she's right." "Grandpa Carter," Boone murmured. "The man who abandoned my mother when I was just a baby." Clara squeezed his arm gently. "Sounds like Uncle Malachi saw through him from the beginning." The entries following Eleanor's marriage were sparse, detailing only coin acquisitions and the occasional note about the weather or ranch maintenance. Then, in 1907, a longer entry. Eleanor showed up at the door past midnight, the boy asleep in her arms. Carter's gone, she said, took what money they had and disappeared. I didn't say I told you so, made up the spare room instead. She cried until dawn, then packed up and left before breakfast. Said she couldn't bear my pity. It wasn't pity, Eleanor. It was love. Always has been. That explains a lot, Boone said quietly. Mom never talked about her family because it hurt too much. Malachi represented everything she'd run from. This ranch, the memories of my father's betrayal, her own wounded pride. An entry from 1984 revealed another layer to the story. Eleanor called today, first time in 3 years. The boy's doing well in school, she said. Smart, like her. Independent, like me. She didn't ask for money this time, which is progress. I sent some anyway, through the lawyer. She'll never know it came from me. Pride is the Carter family curse. He was supporting you all along, Clara said, watching over you from a distance. Boone nodded, a lump forming in his throat. And I never knew. As they continued reading, they discovered that about 15 years ago, Malachi had begun preparing for something he called the contingency. The collection has grown beyond what the safe room can hold, one entry read. Time to implement the vault system. Phase 1 begins tomorrow, 12 locations, each with its own security protocol. If the worst happens, at least they won't get everything at once. Who are they? Clara wondered aloud. I'm guessing people like Thornton, Boone replied. Malachi seems to have been paranoid about someone stealing his collection. Not paranoid if they're really after you, Clara pointed out. The journal entries became increasingly cryptic after that, with references to the system and fail-safes without specific details. Then Clara found something wedged between the final pages, a small key, much newer than the one they'd found in the metal box. What do you think this opens? She asked, holding it up to the light. Boone shook his head. No idea, but let's keep looking. They expanded their search beyond the bedroom, methodically examining each room of the house. In what appeared to be Malachi's study, Clara noticed that one of the armchairs had unusually thick cushions. Papa, help me with this, she called, already pulling at the worn upholstery. Together they removed the cushion, revealing a slit in the fabric underneath. Boone carefully reached inside and felt something hard and flat. He pulled it out, a metal tube, sealed at both ends. It's some kind of container, he said, unscrewing one end. Inside was a rolled-up document, a detailed map of the property, far more comprehensive than the one they'd found in the metal box. This map showed all 200 acres with 12 locations clearly marked. Each had a unique symbol, circles, squares, triangles, stars, and other geometric shapes. Look at this, Clara said excitedly. The oak tree is just one location. There are 11 more. As Boone spread the map on the desk, something else fell out of the tube, a faded photograph. It showed 2 children, perhaps 10 and 8 years old, standing in front of what appeared to be a cave entrance. The boy had his arm protectively around the younger girl, both grinning with the conspiratorial joy of shared adventure. Clara turned the photo over. Written on the back in childish handwriting, where it all began, Raven Cave, 1958, our first secret. Malachi and my mother, Boone said softly. They look so happy. Clara studied the map again. Raven Cave, look, it's marked here. She pointed to a location at the far eastern edge of the property, marked with a symbol that resembled a bird in flight. That must be where they found the first coins, Boone speculated, where the family collection began. As Clara continued examining the map, Boone returned to the journal, looking for any recent entries that might shed light on their current situation. Near the very end, just days before Malachi's death, he found something disturbing. Thornton came back today, not with offers this time, but threats. Says he knows about the collection, knows its value, hinted at connections to people who wouldn't take no for an answer. I've activated the protection system. Sarah Martinez and her team are on standby. If anything happens to me, they'll know what to do. Eleanor's boy will need guidance when the time comes. Sarah? Clara looked up sharply. Like Mom? It can't be a coincidence, Boone said, reading the entry again. Your mother's name, mentioned right alongside someone named Martinez. Clara rifled through more pages until she found a small envelope tucked into the binding. Inside was a business card with a name and phone number. Sarah Martinez, U.S. Marshal Service. A federal marshal? Boone was stunned. Malachi had law enforcement protecting the collection? We need to call her, Clara said, already reaching for her phone. But before she could dial, the distant sound of vehicles approaching made them both freeze. Rusty, who had been dozing by the fireplace, was instantly alert, a low growl rumbling in his throat. Boone moved to the window, keeping to the side to avoid being seen. It's Thornton, and he's brought friends this time. Through the dusty glass, he could see 3 black SUVs pulling up to the house, followed by a larger truck. At least 6 men emerged, all carrying weapons that they made no attempt to conceal. We need to hide the map and journal, Boone said urgently, already gathering the items. And we need to call that marshal. Clara quickly dialed the number on the card, but after several rings, it went to voicemail. This is Marshal Martinez. Leave a message with your name, location, and the nature of your emergency. This is Clara Carter, she whispered frantically. We're at Malachi Brooks's ranch in Montana. Richard Thornton is here with the armed men. Please help us. She had just ended the call when heavy footsteps thumped onto the porch, followed by a pounding on the door that shook the entire front wall. Carter, Thornton's voice boomed through the weathered wood. I know you're in there. We need to talk. Boone motioned for Clara to stay back as he approached the door. What do you want, Thornton? Just a friendly conversation, came the reply, though the tone was anything but friendly. About the collection you've inherited. Boone hesitated, then opened the door, revealing Thornton flanked by 2 men with holstered pistols. The businessman's expensive suit had been replaced by practical outdoor clothing, but his cold smile remained the same. Mr. Carter, I hope you have had time to consider my offer. Still considering, Boone replied, blocking the doorway with his body. 50,000 doesn't seem like much for 200 acres, even if the land is worthless. Thornton's smile tightened. Let's stop playing games. We both know what Malachi Brooks was hiding on this property. A coin collection worth upwards of $100 million. Boone tried to keep his expression neutral, but something must have shown on his face because Thornton's smile widened. Ah, so you found his journal. Good. That will save us time. He gestured to the men behind him. My associates and I are here to help you recover the collection. For a fair percentage, of course. And if I say no, Thornton's pretense of friendliness vanished. Mr. Carter, look around you. You're in the middle of nowhere. Cell service is spotty at best. The nearest neighbor is 15 miles away. And you have a 16-year-old daughter to protect. Do you really want to make this difficult? Before Boone could respond, Clara appeared beside him, her face pale but determined. We know about Sarah Martinez, she said to the U.S. Marshal. We've already contacted her. For the first time, Thornton looked genuinely surprised, then concerned, but he quickly masked it with a dismissive laugh. Martinez is a minor inconvenience. By the time she could get here, if she even responds, we'll be long gone with the collection. He pushed past Boone into the house, his men following closely. Now let's get down to business. You found the map, I assume? And the key to the main vault? Boone and Clara exchanged glances, both realizing they had no choice but to cooperate. For now. We found a key, Boone admitted cautiously, and we discovered something buried under the oak tree, but the lock is jammed. Show me, Thornton commanded. With armed men flanking them, Boone and Clara led the way to the oak tree. The partially excavated metal door was still visible where they'd left it the day before. Excellent, Thornton said, examining the lock mechanism. This is just the primary access point. According to our intelligence, Brooks constructed an elaborate system of 12 vaults across the property. Each contains a portion of the collection. Why so complicated? Clara asked, trying to buy time. Paranoia, Thornton replied dismissively. Brooks was convinced someone was after his precious coins. He wasn't entirely wrong. He gestured to one of his men. Get the equipment. Let's open this thing. The man returned with heavy-duty tools, including a portable drill and bolt cutters. But Thornton waved them away. The old man was clever. These vaults have anti-tampering mechanisms. Try to force it open, and the contents are destroyed. We need the proper key and combinations. He turned to Boone. That's where you come in, Mr. Carter. As the legal heir, you have what we need, the key and presumably the combinations. Boone reluctantly produced the brass key they'd found. The key fits, but it won't turn. And we don't have any combinations. Thornton's eyes narrowed suspiciously. Brooks would have left them somewhere in the journal, perhaps, or encoded in the map. Clara, who had been examining the tree trunk more carefully, suddenly pointed to something carved into the bark. Look at these numbers. Could they be dates? Boone leaned closer. Carved into the tree, almost hidden by moss, were three sets of numbers: 031552, 082378, 061203. March 15th, 1952, he said slowly. My mother's birthday. August 23rd, 1978, Clara continued. That's your birthday, Papa. And June 12th, 2003, Boone finished, the day your mother and I got married. Thornton smiled coldly. Family dates, of course. The old man was sentimental. He gestured to the lock. Try it. The key, then the combinations. Boone inserted the brass key into the lock, and this time with more force it turned with a heavy click. Below the keyhole were three combination dials. He carefully rotated them to match the dates carved in the tree: 031552, 082378, 061203. With the final number set, a deeper mechanism engaged. The metal door shifted slightly, then slowly swung open, revealing a stairway descending into darkness. Magnificent, Thornton breathed, shining a powerful flashlight into the opening. The main vault. One of his men descended first, then called up that it was clear. Thornton motioned for Boone and Clara to go next, following closely behind them. The stairway led to a small chamber reinforced with concrete. The walls were lined with built-in shelving, and on those shelves were dozens of wooden boxes, each one labeled in Malachi's precise handwriting. Open one, Thornton ordered, his voice tight with anticipation. Boone selected a box labeled Morgan Dollars, MS-65 and above. Inside, nestled in custom-fitted compartments, were silver coins that gleamed even in the dim light, each one protected in a clear plastic holder with certification numbers. Do you have any idea what you're looking at? Thornton asked, carefully lifting one of the coins. This is a 1893 Morgan dollar in MS-65 condition, worth at least $500,000 by itself, and this is just one box. Clara's eyes widened. $500,000 for one coin? The rare coin market is specialized, Thornton explained, his tone suddenly professorial. Collectors will pay extraordinary amounts for the right pieces, and your great-uncle assembled one of the finest private collections in America. He replaced the coin and turned to Boone. This vault appears to contain the silver dollar portion of the collection. According to our research, the gold coins are in a separate location, as are the pattern pieces, the early coppers, and the colonial rarities. How do you know so much about my uncle's collection? Boone demanded. Thornton's smile didn't reach his eyes. My organization has been tracking Brooks for years. We approached him multiple times with generous offers, but he always refused to sell. Said the collection wasn't meant for people like us. People like you? Clara asked. People who see coins only as commodities to be bought and sold, Thornton said dismissively. Brooks was an idealist. He thought these bits of metal had some higher purpose. While they talked, Thornton's men were systematically photographing and cataloging the contents of each box. One of them approached with a tablet displaying a spreadsheet. Based on this vault alone, we're looking at approximately $20 million in market value, the man reported. Thornton nodded, and there are 11 more locations to excavate. Now, Mr. Carter, let's discuss the terms of our partnership. Partnership? Boone repeated skeptically. Of course. You have what we need: legal ownership of the collection and presumably the keys and combinations to the remaining vaults. We have the expertise to maximize its value on the market. Thornton gestured expansively. Together, we could turn these coins into liquid assets worth far more than Malachi Brooks ever imagined. And your cut? Boone asked. 60% seems fair, given our investment and expertise. You'd receive 40%, still more money than you'd see in 10 lifetimes of farming. Clara moved closer to her father. We need to discuss this privately. Thornton checked his watch. Take 10 minutes, but remember, Mr. Carter, this offer is significantly more generous than the alternative. The threat hung in the air as Thornton climbed back up the stairs, leaving one armed guard at the entrance to the vault. "We can't trust him," Clara whispered once Thornton was out of earshot. "I know," Boone agreed. "But we need to buy time until that marshal responds. Play along for now." When they emerged from the vault, Thornton was already directing his men to the next location on the map, a spot near the old barn marked with a square symbol. "According to the map, this should be the gold coin repository," Thornton explained as they walked. "The most valuable section of the collection, including the 1933 double eagles that Brooks mentioned in his journal." As his men began digging at the marked spot, Clara pulled her father aside, ostensibly to examine a section of the map, but really to whisper urgently in his ear. "Papa, I found something in the journal that Thornton doesn't know about. The Raven Cave, it's not just where the collection started. It's where Uncle Malachi hid something important, something about the real value of the collection." Boone glanced at the map, locating the cave marker at the eastern edge of the property. "How far is it?" "About a mile through the woods," Clara replied. "But we need a distraction to get away." Before Boone could respond, one of Thornton's men called out triumphantly, "Found something!" They had uncovered another metal door similar to the first but smaller. Thornton quickly approached, examining the lock mechanism. "Carter, we need the key," he demanded. Boone hesitated. "I only have the one key we already used." Thornton's expression darkened. "Brooks would have left the multiple keys. Where are they?" "I don't know," Boone insisted. "We've only been here a day." Thornton studied him for a moment, then turned to his men. "Search the house again. Tear it apart if you have to. The other keys must be hidden somewhere." As several men headed toward the house, Clara tugged at Boone's sleeve, directing his attention to a hollow in an old tree stump near the barn. "Look, Papa," she said loudly enough for Thornton to hear. "Could something be hidden in there?" Thornton immediately signaled for one of his men to investigate. The distraction allowed Clara to whisper to her father, "There's another symbol on the map, near the barn, a W mark. I think it's a warning system, not a vault." Boone nodded slightly, understanding her plan. "Thornton barn," he called out. "I think I know where another key might be. In the old stables." The abandoned stables stood about 50 yards from the barn. The roof partially collapsed, but the structure still largely intact. Thornton followed Boone inside, leaving Clara with two guards. "Where?" Thornton demanded, scanning the dusty interior. Boone pointed to a section of wall where old tack had once hung. "Behind that panel, my uncle's journal mentioned hiding something in the stables." As Thornton and his men focused on prying open the wooden panel, Boone used the opportunity to discover a rusted horseshoe nail protruding from one of the support beams. He carefully worked it free and pocketed it without being noticed. "There's nothing here," Thornton said irritably after they'd removed the panel to reveal only empty space. "Let me think," Boone said, trying to sound cooperative. "The journal mentioned something about hollow trees. Maybe—" They returned to the barn area where Clara was still standing with the guards. One of Thornton's men emerged from the house, carrying a small metal box. "Found this hidden in the fireplace chimney," he reported. "It was walled up behind a loose brick." Thornton opened the box to reveal another brass key, similar to the first but with different engravings. "Excellent," he said, his good humor partially restored. "Now we can access the second vault." While Thornton was distracted with the new key, Boone managed to catch Clara's eye and nod subtly toward the W mark on the map. She understood immediately. "Mr. Thornton," she said, her voice carefully casual, "while you're opening the gold vault, maybe we should check this location too?" She pointed to a spot near the stables marked with the W symbol. "It looks important on the map." Thornton considered for a moment, then nodded. "Johnson, take 2 men and check it out. Could be another vault." As 3 men headed toward the marked location, Boone positioned himself near the barn entrance, ready to move quickly if necessary. Clara stood nearby, tension evident in her rigid posture despite her attempt to appear calm. The men began digging at the W location. After about 5 minutes, a metallic clang signaled they'd hit something. "Got something here," one called out. Thornton, who had been supervising the opening of the second vault, looked up with interest. "What is it?" "Some kind of metal container," the man replied, continuing to clear dirt away. "There's no lock on this one, just a lever." "Wait," Clara called out, suddenly alarmed. "Don't pull that. It might be—" But it was too late. The man had already pulled the lever. For a moment, nothing happened. Then a piercing mechanical wail erupted from the device, so loud it seemed to vibrate the air itself. "What the hell is that?" Thornton shouted over the noise. "An alarm," Boone yelled back. "It's a warning system." The wailing continued for nearly 30 seconds, then abruptly stopped. In the sudden silence, a different sound became apparent, a low electronic hum emanating from what they had assumed was a decorative stone pillar near the house. One of Thornton's men approached the pillar cautiously, then jumped back in surprise. "Boss, this thing just activated. It's some kind of—" Before he could finish, a red light on top of the pillar began flashing, and a mechanical voice announced, "Perimeter breach detected. Security protocol Alpha initiated. Authorities have been notified." Thornton's face contorted with rage. "You set us up," he snarled at Boone. "I didn't know about any alarm system," Boone protested, which was technically true. "We need to move fast," Thornton told his men. "Forget the other vaults for now. Get everything from the first two loaded into the truck. We'll come back for the rest later." He turned to Boone and Clara. "You're coming with us. We still need you to access the remaining vaults." As Thornton's men scrambled to collect the coin boxes from the open vaults, Clara caught her father's eye and nodded almost imperceptibly toward the woods. It was now or never. In the chaos, Clara suddenly broke away, running toward the tree line. One of Thornton's men spotted her and gave chase. "Stop her!" Thornton shouted. Boone immediately launched himself at the man pursuing his daughter, tackling him to the ground. They struggled violently, Boone fighting with the desperate strength of a father protecting his child. But the younger, stronger man quickly gained the upper hand, landing a punishing blow to Boone's face that sent him sprawling. "Enough!" Thornton barked, a pistol now in his hand. "Bring the girl back and secure the father." Two men dragged Boone to his feet, blood streaming from his split lip. But Clara had disappeared into the dense forest. "Find her," Thornton ordered three of his men. "She can't have gone far." As the men plunged into the woods, Thornton approached Boone, his expression coldly furious. "Your daughter has just made a serious mistake, Mr. Carter. One that could cost both of you dearly." Boone said nothing, his eyes on the forest where Clara had vanished. "Secure him in the truck," Thornton instructed. "Once we have the girl, we're leaving." The men bound Boone's hands and locked him in the back of one of the SUVs. Through the window, he could see Thornton's remaining men loading wooden boxes from the vaults into the larger truck. Minutes stretched into an hour with no sign of Clara or the men pursuing her. Thornton paced anxiously, checking his watch repeatedly. Finally, his radio crackled. "No sign of the girl," came a breathless report. "She knows these woods better than we do." "Keep looking," Thornton snapped into the radio. "She has to be somewhere." What Thornton didn't know was that Clara had circled back to the house after losing her pursuers in the woods. Slipping through a rear window, she made her way to Malachi's study, where she knew her father had hidden the old revolver they'd found earlier. The gun was loaded, though whether the ancient ammunition would still fire was anyone's guess. Clara also grabbed the map showing the location of Raven Cave before slipping out again. Keeping to the shadows and using the distraction of the men loading the truck, she managed to reach the barn undetected. From there, she had a clear view of the SUV where her father was being held. One guard stood beside the vehicle, rifle in hand. Clara took a deep breath, steadying herself. She wasn't a violent person, had never even held a gun before today. But her father's life was at stake. Moving silently around the back of the barn, she picked up a heavy rock and threw it as far as she could in the opposite direction. The sound of the rock crashing through underbrush caught the guard's attention. He moved away from the SUV to investigate, giving Clara the opportunity she needed. She sprinted to the vehicle, yanked open the door, and found her father in the back seat, hands bound. "Clara," he whispered, relief and fear mingling in his voice. "What are you doing? You need to run." "Not without you," she insisted, using the horseshoe nail he'd pocketed earlier to work on his bindings. The nail was just sharp enough to fray the rope, and with determined effort, she managed to free him. The guard, realizing he'd been tricked, was already racing back toward the SUV, shouting for backup. Boone grabbed Clara's hand and they ran for the woods, heading east toward Raven Cave. Gunshots cracked behind them, bullets splintering tree bark as they zigzagged through the forest. Thornton's angry shouts faded as they put distance between themselves and the ranch house. But they could hear the sounds of pursuit, men crashing through underbrush, dogs barking in the distance. "This way!" Clara gasped, consulting the map as they ran. The cave should be just beyond that ridge. They scrambled up a steep, rocky slope, loose stones sliding beneath their feet. Boone's injured face throbbed with each heartbeat, and he could taste blood from his split lip, but adrenaline kept him moving. Clara led the way, her knowledge of the map guiding them through unfamiliar terrain. Finally, they crested the ridge and saw below them the dark mouth of a cave set into the hillside. It was partially concealed by vegetation, easy to miss if you didn't know what you were looking for. "That's it," Clara said, her voice a mixture of exhaustion and triumph. "Raven Cave." They half ran, half slid down the slope to the cave entrance. Inside, it was cool and dark, the sounds of pursuit muffled by solid rock. Boone switched on the small flashlight from his keychain, revealing a narrow passage that led deeper into the hillside. "According to the journal," Clara whispered as they moved forward, "this is where Malachi and Grandma Eleanor found the first coins as children. Some kind of old hideout or smuggler's cache." The passage widened into a larger chamber, and Boone's flashlight revealed something unexpected. A modern metal door set into the rock wall, with an electronic keypad beside it. "This doesn't look like something from the 1950s, Boone observed. "Uncle Malachi must have added it later," Clara reasoned, "part of his security system." They examined the keypad, which required a 6-digit code. Clara studied it thoughtfully, then tried entering the first date from the oak tree, 03-1552, her grandmother's birthday. The keypad beeped negatively. "Try your birthday," Boone suggested. Clara entered 01206, December 12, 2006. Again, the keypad rejected the code. "What about—" She hesitated, then entered 092221, September 20, 2021, the date her mother had died. The keypad emitted a positive tone, and the door clicked open. Boone looked at his daughter in surprise. "How did you know?" "The journal said the important dates make the best passwords," Clara explained. "And what date would be more important to Uncle Malachi than the day that connected us to him? The day that set all this in motion?" They pushed through the door into a space that defied all expectations. Instead of a primitive cave or a simple storage area, they found themselves in a fully equipped modern command center. Computer monitors lined one wall, displaying security camera feeds from around the property. Radio equipment occupied another section, along with what appeared to be satellite communication devices. "He was monitoring everything," Boone said in amazement. "The entire ranch." One of the monitors suddenly flashed with an alert. "Perimeter alarm activated. Response team en route. ETA 15 minutes. The warning system worked, Clara breathed. "Help is coming." In the center of the room stood a large safe, its heavy doors secured with both an electronic lock and a traditional key mechanism. Clara reached into her pocket and pulled out the small key they'd found hidden between the journal pages. "I think this is what it opens," she said, inserting the key into the lock. The key turned smoothly, but the safe remained locked, waiting for an electronic code. "One more password," Boone muttered, studying the keypad. Clara thought for a moment, then entered the same date that had opened the door, 092221. The safe beeped negatively. "It can't be that simple," she reasoned. "This is protecting something more important." She tried several more dates. Malachi's birthday, as listed in the journal, the date he acquired his first valuable coin, the date the ranch was purchased. None worked. What was most important to him? Boone wondered aloud. Not coins, not dates, but family, Clara finished. The collection was never about the money. It was about legacy. She entered a new sequence, 052045. May 20th, 1945, the date Malachi and Eleanor had been orphaned, according to a journal entry. The date that had bound them together as children. The date that began their shared story. The safe beeped positively and the heavy door swung open. Inside was not the expected cache of rare coins, but a stack of documents, a USB drive, and a sealed letter addressed to Boone Carter. "What is all this?" Boone wondered, carefully removing the contents. Clara was already examining the documents. "These are authentication certificates for the entire collection, appraisals, provenance documentation, dealer contacts, everything needed to sell the coins legally for full market value. And without these, Boone realized, The coins are worth a fraction of their potential value. That's why Thornton needs us alive. Without the proper documentation, he'd have to sell on the black market at pennies on the dollar. There's more, Clara said, pointing to one of the monitors. Look, the screen showed Thornton and his men loading the last of the coin boxes into their truck. But in the distance, barely visible through the trees, were flashing lights, multiple vehicles approaching fast. The response team, Boone said. Who are they? Clara inserted the USB drive into one of the computers. It contained a video file which she immediately played. Malachi Brooks appeared on screen, looking frail but determined, recording what would be his final message. Boone, the old man began, his voice stronger than his appearance suggested. If you're watching this, then you've found Raven Cave in the safe room. Good. That means you're smarter than Thornton and his collectors. Malachi explained that he had spent decades not just collecting coins, but building a case against Thornton's organization, a criminal enterprise that targeted valuable private collections through intimidation and violence. I could have sold the collection years ago, Malachi continued, but it became clear that these people needed to be stopped. So I created a trap with myself as bait. Sarah Martinez and her team of U.S. Marshals have been gathering evidence for years. The collection is real, and it's valuable. But its greatest value is as evidence against Thornton and his associates. Clara and Boone watched in stunned silence as Malachi detailed how he had meticulously documented every threat, every illegal offer, building a case that would destroy Thornton's organization completely. The coins are yours, Boone, Malachi concluded. A legacy from an uncle you never knew. But the real treasure isn't in how much money you have, but what you do with it. That's the difference between an asset and a legacy. As the video ended, they heard the distant sound of gunfire from the direction of the ranch. We should stay here, Boone said, putting a protective arm around Clara. Let the marshals handle Thornton. On the monitors, they watched as multiple law enforcement vehicles surrounded the ranch house. Uniformed officers with tactical gear were taking up positions, weapons drawn. It's over, Clara whispered. Uncle Malachi won. We all did, Boone corrected her, looking at the documentation that would secure their future. This isn't about the money, Thornton. It's about what you do with it. That's the difference between an asset and a legacy. With trembling hands, Boone opened the sealed letter from Malachi. The heavy bond paper felt substantial between his fingers, tangible evidence of a connection to a man he'd never known, but who had shaped his destiny from afar. Clara leaned against his shoulder, her face illuminated by the soft glow of the computer monitors that lined the cave's command center. My dear nephew, the letter began in the same precise handwriting they'd come to recognize from the journal. If you're reading this, then you found your way to Raven Cave, the heart of everything I've built. The journey that brought you here wasn't an accident or mere coincidence. It was the culmination of decades of planning, protection, and love from those who watched over you, even when you didn't know they were there. Boone's voice faltered as he continued reading. I've known about you since the day you were born, Boone. When Eleanor cut me out of her life, I respected her wishes, but never stopped caring. I hired private investigators to keep me informed about your life, your struggles, your triumphs, your marriage to Sarah, the birth of your beautiful Clara. He knew about me, Clara whispered, her eyes wide with wonder. Boone nodded, continuing to read. What you may find hardest to believe is that your meeting with Sarah wasn't the chance encounter you've always believed it to be. Sarah Williams was the granddaughter of my oldest friend, Thomas Williams. When I learned that she was studying nursing in the same town where you had taken construction work, I arranged for you to meet at that diner. Not the meeting itself, that spark between you was genuine, but the circumstances that put you both in the same place at the same time. Boone's hands shook more violently now, the paper rustling audibly in the quiet of the cave. He arranged for me to meet your mother? Keep reading, Papa, Clara urged gently. I hope you can forgive this meddling in your life, the letter continued. I wanted you to have the family I never managed to create for myself. And Sarah was everything I hoped she would be for you, strong, kind, and fiercely protective of those she loved. Which is why, when she received her diagnosis, she reached out to me directly. Boone looked up sharply. What? Sarah contacted me a year before she died. She knew the prognosis was grim, despite what the doctors were telling you both. She wanted to ensure that you and Clara would be protected after she was gone. Together, we developed what she called the contingency plan. She became part of the protection network I had built around the collection, connecting with Marshall Martinez and helping to document Thornton's illegal activities. Clara's hand tightened around her father's arm. Mom knew? All along? Sarah made me promise not to reveal myself to you until after she was gone, and only when you truly needed help. She believed you needed to forge your own path, but she also understood that sometimes even the strongest among us need a safety net. The collection was always meant for you, Boone, not as charity, but as your rightful inheritance, and as the means to give Clara the future Sarah dreamed of for her. Tears blurred Boone's vision as he finished the letter. The greatest treasure I possess isn't buried in these vaults, but in the legacy of family that connects us across time and distance. Eleanor, Sarah, and now you and Clara, the true collection I've spent my life assembling. The coins are simply the means to protect that legacy. The letter was signed simply, Your Uncle Malachi. For several minutes, neither Boone nor Clara spoke. The revelation that Sarah had known about Malachi, had actively collaborated with him to protect her family after her death, was overwhelming. The carefully constructed narrative of their lives had suddenly shifted, revealing hidden connections and purpose where they had seen only random chance and misfortune. Papa, Clara finally whispered, do you think Mom would have told us eventually if she'd lived? Boone wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. I don't know, sweetheart. Your mother had her reasons for keeping secrets. She was always trying to protect us, even from painful truths. He turned his attention to the thick folder that had accompanied the letter. Inside were meticulously organized documents, legal papers, photographs, and what appeared to be surveillance reports spanning decades. This is a case file, he realized, leafing through the pages. Evidence against Thornton and his organization. The file revealed that Richard Thornton was not merely an overeager businessman, but the leader of a criminal enterprise known as the Collectors. For over 20 years, they had targeted valuable private collections across the country, using intimidation, blackmail, and occasionally violence to acquire rare artifacts at a fraction of their worth. Look at this, Clara said, pointing to a section detailing Thornton's background. He used to work for the FBI's art crime team before being dismissed for ethical violations. He took his knowledge of high-value collectibles and the people who own them and built a criminal operation around it. The file contained photographs of Thornton meeting with known criminals, transcripts of threatening phone calls, and detailed accounts of collections that had mysteriously disappeared after their owners refused to sell. Malachi had been gathering this evidence for years, working with U.S. Marshal Sarah Martinez to build a case strong enough to bring down the entire organization. Malachi wasn't just protecting his coins, Boone said. He was setting a trap, using himself and his collection as bait to draw Thornton out. One document particularly caught Clara's attention, a list of victims, elderly collectors who had been found dead under suspicious circumstances after refusing to sell their collections, families intimidated into silence, museums that had suffered mysterious thefts after turning down acquisition offers from Thornton's front companies. These people, Clara murmured, scanning the names, some of them lost everything. Others lost their lives. And Thornton would have done the same to us, Boone said grimly, if we hadn't found this place. Clara had moved to one of the computer terminals and was examining the surveillance feeds. Papa, look at this. On the screens, they could see tactical teams surrounding the ranch house. Marshall Martinez, a tall woman with her dark hair pulled back in a severe bun, was directing operations from behind one of the vehicles. Thornton's men were scattered, some surrendering with hands raised, others taking cover behind vehicles or outbuildings. We should let them know we're safe, Boone said, looking around the command center for a communication device. Clara pointed to a modern radio setup with a red button labeled Emergency Channel. This must connect directly to Marshal Martinez, she said. Boone pressed the button and a light indicated the channel was open. This is Boone Carter. My daughter Clara and I are safe in Raven Cave. We have Malachi's evidence file. After a moment of static, a woman's voice responded. Mr. Carter, this is Marshal Sarah Martinez. Stay where you are. We have the situation under control at the ranch house. I'll send a team to your location once it's secure. Marshal, Boone continued, Richard Thornton may be headed your way. He and two of his men were pursuing us toward the cave. Understood, Martinez replied. We've already apprehended four of his associates. Stay on this channel and report if you see or hear anything. As Boone acknowledged the instructions, Clara had turned her attention to a small metal device on one of the shelves. It was about the size of a smartphone but thicker, with a simple interface consisting of a small screen and three buttons. Emergency use only, she read from the label. Direct connection to Marshal Martinez. We already made contact through the radio, Boone pointed out. I know, but this is different. Clara examined the device more carefully. It says secure line personal. I think this was meant specifically for us, not just for emergencies. She pressed the power button and the screen lit up with a simple message. Connection established. Awaiting authentication. Clara hesitated, then entered her mother's death date, the same code that had opened the safe. The screen changed, displaying a phone interface with a single contact. Sarah M. With a glance at her father for approval, Clara pressed the call button. After 2 rings, a woman's voice answered, the same voice they had just heard on the radio, but somehow more personal, less official. Clara? Boone? Is that you? Yes, Clara replied. We found the device in the cave. Thank God you're safe, Marshal Martinez said, genuine relief in her voice. I've been waiting for this call ever since Malachi told me you might be coming to the ranch. You knew we were coming? Boone asked, taking the device from Clara. We've been monitoring the property since Malachi's death, Martinez explained. When we saw Thornton's men increasing their surveillance, we knew it was only a matter of time before the heir would appear. When Clara called my office earlier, I was already en route with my team. The letter says you worked with my wife, Boone said, his voice tight with emotion. With Sarah. There was a brief silence before Martinez responded, her tone softer. Yes, Sarah contacted me about a year before she passed away. She had learned about Malachi through her grandfather, who had been friends with him for decades. When she received her diagnosis, she was determined to ensure you and Clara would be protected after she was gone. Why didn't she tell me? Boone couldn't keep the hurt from his voice. She wanted to, Martinez said gently, but she was afraid the knowledge would be a burden when you were already dealing with so much. She made me promise that we would only reveal ourselves if you were truly in danger or desperate need. The farm foreclosure, Clara realized. That's what triggered Malachi's letter being sent. Yes, Martinez confirmed. Sarah set up a system with Malachi's lawyers. If certain conditions were met, the farm being lost, financial hardship below a certain threshold, the letter would be sent automatically. She wanted you to try to make it on your own first, but she never intended to leave you without a safety net. Boone was silent, absorbing this revelation. His wife, even in her final months, had been thinking ahead, planning, protecting them. While he had been focused on the immediate battle against her cancer, Sarah had been preparing for a future she knew she wouldn't see. It must have been so hard for her, Clara said softly, tears welling in her eyes. Knowing she was going to leave us, trying to make sure we'd be okay without her. Boone nodded, unable to speak past the lump in his throat. The Sarah he'd known had been brave and practical, but he'd never fully grasped the depth of her strength until now. Marshal Martinez, Clara said, filling the silence. There's something else you should know. Thornton followed us into the woods. He could be... Her words were cut off by the distant sound of footsteps echoing through the cave passage. Boone immediately moved to position himself between Clara and the entrance to the command center. Someone's coming, he whispered into the device. Multiple people. My team is still securing the ranch, Martinez replied urgently. Those aren't my people. Take cover and stay quiet. We're on our way. Boone ended the call and pocketed the device. He looked around the command center for anything that could serve as a weapon, settling on a heavy flashlight. Clara had already retreated to the far side of the room, the old revolver they'd found earlier clutched in her hands. The footsteps grew louder, accompanied now by the sound of labored breathing and occasional muttered curses. Then Thornton's voice, no longer smooth and controlled, but ragged with exertion and anger. I know you're in there, Carter. There's nowhere left to run. Boone caught Clara's eye and motioned for her to stay hidden behind the bank of computers. He positioned himself to the side of the doorway, flashlight raised. Thornton appeared first, a pistol in his hand, his expensive outdoor clothing now torn and dirty from the chase through the woods. Behind him came two of his men, similarly disheveled but equally armed. "Carter!" Thornton called again, stepping further into the room. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be. We can still make a deal." Boone remained silent, waiting for Thornton to move fully into the room. When the businessman had advanced enough that his back was to Boone's hiding place, Boone swung the heavy flashlight with all his strength, connecting solidly with Thornton's arm. Thornton cried out in pain, the gun dropping from his hand and skittering across the floor. His men reacted immediately, raising their weapons, but Clara emerged from her hiding place, the revolver pointed steadily at them. "Don't move," she said, her voice remarkably calm despite the tremor in her hands. The standoff lasted only seconds before Thornton laughed, a harsh, humorless sound. "You think you can stop us with that antique? I doubt it would even fire after all these years." One of his men took a step forward, and Clara pulled the trigger. The report was deafening in the confined space, the bullet embedding itself in the cave wall just inches from the man's head. He froze, eyes wide with shock. "The next one won't miss," Clara said, her voice steady despite the tears that had sprung to her eyes at the violence of the moment. Thornton, recovering from the initial shock of Boone's attack, lunged for his fallen weapon. Boone intercepted him, and they grappled desperately on the cave floor, each fighting for control. Thornton was younger and fitter, but Boone fought with the desperate strength of a father protecting his child. The other armed man, seeing his boss in trouble, aimed his weapon at Boone. Clara fired again, this time grazing the man's shoulder. He yelped in pain and dropped his gun, clutching at the wound. Thornton managed to land a solid blow to Boone's injured face, reopening the split lip and sending fresh pain lancing through his head. But Boone held on, knowing that to lose this fight meant death for both him and Clara. "You don't understand what you're dealing with, Carter," Thornton grunted as they struggled. "The collectors aren't just me. They're powerful people, connected people. They'll find you no matter where you go." "They can try," Boone shot back, managing to pin Thornton's arm beneath his knee. "But Malachi's been planning for this longer than you know." The struggle carried them across the command center toward one of the computer terminals. Thornton slammed Boone against the edge of the desk, knocking the wind from his lungs. As Boone gasped for breath, Thornton reached again for his fallen gun. "Papa!" Clara cried out in warning, but before Thornton could reach the weapon, a low rumble vibrated through the cave. Dust and small stones began to rain down from the ceiling. "What the hell?" one of Thornton's men exclaimed, looking up in alarm. Clara's eyes widened in recognition. "The defense system. It's in Malachi's journal, a failsafe if intruders enter the cave." She lunged for a red lever on the wall marked "Emergency Only," pulling it down with all her strength. Immediately, metal shutters began descending over the entrance to the command center. Thornton, seeing his escape route closing, abandoned his struggle with Boone and made a dash for the door. But he was too slow. The shutters slammed into place, sealing the command center just as a much louder rumble shook the entire cave system. The lights flickered, then stabilized, running on what must have been an emergency power system. "What did you do?" Thornton demanded, rounding on Clara with fury in his eyes. "Protected us," she replied, still holding the revolver. "The cave entrance is collapsing, sealing us in until help arrives." "It's over, Thornton." "Over," he snarled. "I still have men outside. They'll dig us out and then—" "Your men are being arrested as we speak," Boone interrupted, painfully pulling himself to his feet. "U.S. Marshals have surrounded the ranch. There's nowhere for any of you to go." As if to confirm his words, the radio crackled to life with Marshal Martinez's voice. "Boone, Clara, do you copy? We heard an explosion." Boone grabbed the radio. "We're here. We're safe. The cave defense system activated, some kind of controlled collapse of the outer passages. We're sealed in the command center with Thornton and two of his men." "Understood," Martinez responded. "We have the rest of his team in custody. Sit tight. We have the coordinates of the command center, and we'll begin extraction as soon as it's safe." Thornton slumped against the wall, the fight visibly draining out of him as he realized the extent of his defeat. His two men, one nursing his wounded shoulder, the other still shaken from his near miss, sat on the floor with expressions of grim resignation. "You have no idea what you've done," Thornton said bitterly. "The people I work for won't stop because of one setback." "The collectors?" Clara asked, lowering the revolver slightly now that the immediate danger had passed. We know all about them, and so do the federal authorities thanks to Uncle Malachi's evidence. Thornton's eyes widened slightly, then narrowed in calculation. Brooks was more thorough than we realize. He spent 40 years building his collection, Boone said, and 20 years building a case against you and your organization. I'd say that qualifies as thorough. For the next hour, they maintained an uneasy standoff in the sealed command center. Clara kept watch over Thornton and his men with the revolver, while Boone communicated with Marshal Martinez via radio, updating her on their situation and learning more about the operation unfolding at the ranch. We've secured all the coin boxes they managed to load into their truck, Martinez reported. Approximately 30 million in rare coins, according to our initial assessment. The rest of the collection remains secure in the vaults. And Thornton's men? Boone asked. 8 in custody, including his second in command. They're already starting to talk, hoping for leniency. This case is going to dismantle the entire organization, just as Malachi planned. As they waited for rescue, Boone found himself studying Thornton. The man who had seemed so threatening, so powerful just hours ago, now looked diminished. Without his air of authority and his armed entourage, he was just a middle-aged man in dirty clothes, his carefully styled hair now matted with sweat and cave dust. Why coins? Boone asked suddenly. With your background, you could have targeted anything: art, antiquities, jewelry. Why focus on coin collections? Thornton looked up, surprise briefly replacing the sullen defeat on his face. Because coins are perfect, small, highly valuable, easily transported, with an established international market. And collectors are vulnerable, often elderly, living alone, with minimal security compared to museums or galleries. Like my uncle, Boone said. Thornton's laugh was bitter. Brooks was supposed to be an easy target, a hermit living on a worthless piece of land in the middle of nowhere. But he turned out to be... He trailed off, shaking his head. Smarter than you, Clara finished for him. You think this is about smart? Thornton snapped. It's about power and connections. Your uncle had neither. Yet here we are, Boone observed quietly. You in handcuffs, him having outsmarted you from beyond the grave. Thornton fell silent, his jaw working as if chewing on words he couldn't bring himself to say. During the long wait, Clara moved to sit beside her father, away from Thornton and his men, but still keeping them in sight. Papa, she whispered, I need to tell you something. About Mom. Boone turned to her, concerned by the serious expression on her face. She told me there was a plan, Clara continued, her voice barely audible. The last week before she died, she made me promise not to tell you unless something happened to the farm. She said there was a safety net, that we wouldn't lose everything. I thought it was just the medication talking, or that she was trying to make me feel better. I never imagined. You knew? Boone asked, careful to keep his voice neutral despite the shock. Clara shook her head quickly. Not about Uncle Malachi or the collection, just that Mom said there was a plan, that we'd be okay somehow. I should have told you, but I didn't want to give you false hope based on something that seemed so impossible. Boone pulled his daughter into a gentle embrace. You did nothing wrong, Clara. Your mother was trying to protect both of us, in her own way. I feel like I failed her, Clara admitted, tears welling in her eyes. We lost the farm. We almost lost everything. We didn't fail her, Boone said firmly. We did exactly what she wanted. We tried to make it on our own. And when that wasn't possible anymore, her plan activated, just as she intended. Clara nodded against his shoulder, taking comfort in his words. I miss her so much, Papa. I know, sweetheart. I do too. But now I can see that she never really left us. She's been watching over us all along, through Malachi, through this inheritance. But after nearly 3 hours, they heard the sound of machinery from beyond the sealed entrance. The radio crackled with Martinez's voice. We're through the collapse. Stand by for extraction. When the metal shutters finally retracted, Marshal Sarah Martinez stood in the doorway, flanked by tactical officers. She was tall and athletic, with streaks of silver in her dark hair that gave her an air of distinguished authority. Her eyes swept the room, taking in the situation in a single practiced glance. "Mr. Carter, Clara," she nodded to them. "Are you hurt?" "Nothing serious," Boone replied, though his face was throbbing and he suspected he might have cracked a rib in his struggle with Thornton. Martinez's officers quickly took custody of Thornton and his men, securing them with handcuffs before leading them out through the newly cleared passage. Thornton glanced back once at Boone and Clara, his expression unreadable, before disappearing to the tunnel. Once they were alone with Martinez, Clara lowered the revolver she'd been holding for so long that her hand had cramped around it. The marshal gently took it from her, examining it briefly before securing it in an evidence bag. "You did well," she told Clara. "Both of you. Malachi would be proud." "You knew him well?" Boone asked as they gathered the evidence files and prepared to leave the command center. Martinez nodded. "For over 15 years. He recruited me when I was a junior marshal, convinced me that the collectors were worth investigating when my superiors thought he was just a paranoid old man. Turns out he was right about everything." As they made their way through the cleared tunnel toward daylight, Boone asked the question that had been nagging at him since they discovered the truth. "Did Sarah, my wife, know how dangerous this would be for us? Sending us here, knowing Thornton was watching?" Martina's expression softened. She knew there were risks, but she also knew the protection systems Malachi had put in place. The timing was her idea, waiting until you truly needed help, but making sure you found the ranch before Thornton could locate the collection on his own. She believed in you, Boone, believed you would figure it out and protect Clara, just as you always had. "Did she suffer at the end?" Clara asked suddenly. "Mom, I mean. Did she know how bad it was going to be?" Martinez hesitated, clearly weighing how much to reveal. She knew, yes, but she faced it with extraordinary courage. Her main concern was always you two, making sure you would be safe, that you would have a future. "That sounds like Sarah," Boone said quietly, thinking of everyone but herself. They emerged from the cave into late afternoon sunlight. The forest was alive with law enforcement activity, vehicles with various agency markings, officers securing the area, evidence being cataloged and transported. At the center of it all was the ranch house, now serving as an impromptu command post. "What happens now?" Clara asked, squinting in the sudden brightness. "Now," Martinez said, "we complete what Malachi started. We use his evidence to dismantle the collectors' network, recover stolen collections from across the country, and make sure Thornton and his associates spend a very long time in federal prison." "And the coin collection?" Boone asked. "That's entirely up to you. It's your inheritance, legally and legitimately. Once the case is closed, you'll have full access to it." Martinez smiled slightly, though I understand from Malachi that it comes with certain expectations. "What kind of expectations?" Clara asked. "He believed that wealth comes with responsibility," Martinez explained, "that the true value of money lies not in possessing it, but in how you use it. It's all in his letters and journals. I think he trusted you both to figure out what that means for you." 6 months later, Boone stood on the porch of a sprawling ranch house in Colorado, watching as Clara guided her horse through the training course they'd set up in the corral. The morning sun cast long shadows across their new property, 3,000 acres of prime ranch land purchased with a fraction of the proceeds from Malachi's coin collection. The collection had indeed been worth far more than even Thornton had estimated. After taxes and fees, the final value had come to $151 million. Enough to change their lives completely, but as Boone had discovered, money alone wasn't the legacy Malachi had intended to leave. A vehicle appeared on the long driveway leading to the house, dust billowing behind it as it approached. Clara, spotting it from the corral, dismounted and jogged toward the porch. "Is that Marshal Martinez?" she asked, shading her eyes against the sun. Boone nodded. "She said she had news about Thornton's trial." The marshal's SUV pulled up in front of the house, and Sarah Martinez emerged, looking more relaxed in casual clothes than the tactical gear they'd first seen her in. 6 months of working together to build the case against the collectors had transformed their relationship from official to something approaching friendship. "Good morning," Martinez called as she climbed the porch steps. "Beautiful place you've got here." "Thanks to you and Malachi," Boone replied, offering her a cup of coffee from the pot they kept brewing for the ranch hands. Martinez accepted the coffee and settled into one of the porch chairs. Thornton was sentenced yesterday, 35 years without possibility of parole. His organization has been completely dismantled, and we've recovered stolen collections worth over $400 million from their various warehouses and front companies. That's wonderful news, Clara said, genuine pleasure lighting her face. At 17, she had matured remarkably in the months since their ordeal, the experience having forged her natural intelligence and compassion into something stronger, more purposeful. There's something else, Martinez added, reaching into her jacket to retrieve a leather portfolio. This is the final documentation regarding your case. Thornton's appeals have been exhausted. He'll never threaten you or anyone else again. Boone took the portfolio, leafing through the official court documents that confirmed Thornton's conviction and sentencing. After months of testimony and legal proceedings, justice had finally been served completely and definitively. We also found evidence that your uncle Malachi helped fund our investigation into Thornton's organization for over 2 years before his death, Martinez continued. He knew they were targeting families with valuable inheritances, and he wanted to make sure they were stopped. Clara shook her head in amazement. Uncle Malachi was protecting people he'd never even met. He was protecting his family's legacy, Martinez replied, and ensuring that other families wouldn't go through what he was afraid you might face. As they talked, Boone found himself reflecting on how much their lives had changed in 6 months. The desperate farmer with $17 to his name was now the owner of a prosperous ranch. The girl who had faced losing her childhood home was now planning for college with unlimited possibilities before her. But the greatest change wasn't financial. It was the sense of connection, of belonging to something larger than themselves. Through Malachi's journals and letters, they had discovered not just the story of a coin collector, but the history of a family that had weathered hardships, made mistakes, but ultimately found its way back to each other. I've been meaning to ask you, Martinez said, interrupting Boone's thoughts. Have you learned anything more about why Eleanor and Malachi became estranged? The case files didn't cover much of their personal history. Boone nodded. Malachi's journals filled in some of the gaps. After my mother married my father and he abandoned us, she was too proud to return to the ranch, too ashamed to face Malachi after he'd warned her about the marriage. And Malachi, stubborn as he was, respected her decision to stay away, even though it broke his heart. They were both protecting each other in their own misguided ways, Clara added. Kind of like how Mom protected us by keeping Uncle Malachi a secret. Family secrets, Martinez mused. Sometimes they're meant to protect. Sometimes they end up causing more harm than good. That's why we've decided not to keep secrets anymore, Boone said, glancing at his daughter with a smile. Clara and I have promised each other total honesty, no matter how difficult. After Martinez left, Boone and Clara sat together on the porch swing, watching the sun climb higher in the Colorado sky. The past 6 months had been transformative in ways neither of them could have imagined. With the proceeds from the coin collection, they had established the Eleanor Foundation, dedicated to helping struggling farmers and families facing medical debt. They had purchased this ranch not just as a home for themselves, but as a sanctuary where others could find respite and renewal. They had even hired some of their former neighbors who had lost their own farms to economic hardship, giving them jobs and housing on the new property. Papa, Clara said quietly after a long, comfortable silence, do you think Mom and Uncle Malachi would be proud of what we've built here? Boone pulled her closer. Sweetheart, I think they'd be amazed by the woman you've become and the life we've created. This ranch isn't just about the money Uncle Malachi left us. It's about the love and planning that went into making sure we'd be okay. Clara nodded, her head resting against her father's shoulder. I've been thinking about college next year. Anywhere you want to go, Boone assured her. That's what all this was for, to give you opportunities. I want to study law, she said, like Marshall Martinez. Maybe work for the Justice Department someday, helping people who can't fight for themselves. Boone smiled, unsurprised. Clara had always had a strong sense of justice, even as a child. Now, with everything they'd experienced, that quality had found its purpose. Your mother would be so proud, he said. She always said you had the determination to change the world. Clara smiled at that. I remember. She used to tell me that the most important thing wasn't what you owned, but what you stood for. She was right about that, Boone agreed. Just like Malachi was right about the true value of his collection. Later that evening, after Claire had gone to bed, Boone sat in his study examining the contents of a small package that had arrived that morning from Malachi's lawyer. Inside was a sealed envelope marked to be delivered 6 months after resolution of the Thornton matter. Boone opened it carefully, not surprised to find another letter in his uncle's precise handwriting. What did surprise him was the photograph that accompanied it, a family portrait he had never seen before, showing Malachi, a much younger Eleanor, and what must have been their parents, standing in front of the original family farmhouse. The letter was brief. Boone, if you're reading this, then justice has been served, and you and Clara have begun building the life you deserve. The collection has served its purpose, not just as financial security, but as the instrument of justice against those who prey on the vulnerable. There is one final vault I never documented in any map or journal. Its location is marked on the enclosed diagram, on property that once belonged to your grandparents, Eleanor's and my childhood home. The contents aren't valuable in monetary terms, but they are the true Carter family legacy. Photographs, letters, the stories of where we came from and who we were. Eleanor ran from these memories, but in doing so, she lost something precious. You don't have to make the same choice. The past isn't just about pain. It's also about roots, about belonging to something larger than ourselves. The true treasure isn't what we bury, but what we leave behind. Not the money we save, but the lives we touch. Your uncle, Malachi. Attached to the letter was a small map showing a location in eastern Nebraska, the site of the original Carter family farm. According to the notes, it had been sold decades ago, but the small family cemetery remained, protected by a trust Malachi had established. Boone studied the map, then the family photograph, seeing in the faces of his grandparents echoes of his mother, himself, and even Clara. For the first time since his mother's death, he felt connected to a lineage that extended both before and beyond him, a continuity that transcended the isolation he had felt for most of his life. The next morning, he shared the letter and map with Clara over breakfast. "Another treasure hunt?" she asked, eyes lighting up with excitement. "A different kind of treasure," Boone replied. "Family history. Roots." Clara examined the map thoughtfully. "When can we go?" "Whenever you want. The ranch manager can handle things here for a few days." "Let's do it," Clara decided. "I want to know where we came from. All of it, the good and the bad." 2 weeks later, they stood in a small, well-maintained cemetery in what had once been Carter family land. The gravestones were simple but dignified, spanning generations from the 1850s to the most recent, Eleanor Carter, 1952-1990. "I never even knew where she was buried," Boone said softly, laying flowers on his mother's grave. "After she died, the state handled everything. I was too young to ask questions." Clara knelt beside him, tracing the letters of her grandmother's name with gentle fingers. "She's with her family now, and we're here. The circle is complete." Following Malachi's map, they located a small metal box buried beneath a marker, inscribed only with the family name. Inside, protected by careful packaging, were letters, photographs, and a journal much older than Malachi's, written by their great-grandmother during the Dust Bowl years. "Listen to this," Clara said, reading from the journal. "Times are hard and money is scarce, but the Carter family has something more valuable than gold: each other. As long as we remember that wealth is measured in love, not dollars, we will never truly be poor." Boone smiled at the echo of Malachi's philosophy across generations. "I guess that's the real Carter legacy." They spent the day exploring the small town nearby, meeting elderly residents who still remembered the Carter family, piecing together stories that had been lost to time. By sunset, they had filled in many of the gaps in their family history, discovering not just struggles and hardship, but moments of triumph, acts of kindness, and threads of resilience that connected them to a larger tapestry. Back at their Colorado ranch a week later, Clara added their newfound treasures to a family history display she had created in the main house. Photographs spanning 5 generations now lined the walls of the entryway, welcoming visitors with the faces of those who had come before. "It feels right," she told her father as they stood admiring the completed display. "Like they're all watching over us now." "They always were," Boone replied. "We just didn't know it." As autumn turned to winter, the Eleanor Foundation began its first major initiatives, a program to help small farms implement sustainable practices, a medical debt forgiveness fund for rural families, and scholarships for students from farming communities. The work gave both Boone and Clara a sense of purpose that transcended their personal comfort. "We're building something that will outlast us," Boone observed one evening as they reviewed applications for the scholarship program. "A legacy that's about more than money." "Just like Uncle Malachi wanted," Clara agreed, "using what we have to make a difference." The poor farmer who had once had $17 to his name now possessed wealth beyond imagination. But more importantly, he had gained something far more valuable, the knowledge that his daughter would never want for anything, that his family's story would continue, and that the love that had protected him through his mother, his wife, and his uncle would endure in the legacy they now built together. The true treasure, Boone realized, wasn't what they had buried, but what they would leave behind. Not the money they saved, but the lives they would touch with it. That was the real inheritance Malachi had left them. Not a fortune in coins, but a chance to create meaning from loss, purpose from pain, and legacy from love. As stars appeared in the Colorado sky, Boone watched his daughter sketching plans for an expansion of the Foundation's programs. In her determined expression, he could see echoes of Sarah's compassion, Eleanor's stubborn pride, and Malachi's patient wisdom, the best qualities of a family that had found its way back together after decades of separation and silence. "The true treasure isn't what we bury," he murmured, echoing Malachi's words, "but what we leave behind. Not the money we save, but the lives we touch." Clara looked up from her work, smiling at her father with understanding beyond her years. "That's what this is all about, isn't it? That's what makes it a legacy instead of just an inheritance." "Exactly," Boone agreed, "and I think we're on the right track."